talk. We're going to be listening to Alejandro Marin, who is a PhD candidate in Romance languages at the University of Oregon. He earned an MA in teaching Spanish at Northern Arizona University in 2019, and a BA in Humanities with an emphasis in modern languages at the Universidad Libre in Bogotá, Colombia in 2015. In the summer of 2024, Alejandro received the Portuguese Teachers Fellowship at Middlebury Language School. And at UO, he has been awarded the Nicolette B. Weicker Memorial Scholarship, a Global Oregon Graduate Research Award, a Summer Grant for Research, a Promising Scholar Award, and the Raymond Fellowship Award. A highly decorated speaker today. As a 2025-26 Oregon Humanities Center Dissertation Fellow, Alejandro, known to many of us as Alejo, has been working on a project titled The New Errancy, Unveiling Contemporary Migrant Literature in Cuba, the Dominican Republic, and Equatorial Guinea. He shares his work in progress with us today. Thank you for coming.
All right, thank you so much. And before I start this conversation with all of you today, I want to thank you, the Oregon Humanities Center, for believing in this project, for giving me the time, for giving me the space, the quiet to focus on this long and endless task that we call a dissertation. Also for providing the space and giving me the push to come over here and present this work, or this project that I've been working on for a couple of years. I also want to thank the Romance Languages Department who have supported this project from the very, very beginning. And I also want to thank all of you friends, colleagues in the UO community who were curious enough to come over here to join me today. As Leah said, what I'm going to do today is that I'm going to share with you a work in progress for my dissertation. It's a dissertation that I'm planning to defend next spring, and it's a dissertation that has 3 different chapters, and the first and the second chapters are mostly complete. I'm still working on major revisions. It's the third chapter that I'm spending a lot of time on. It's still in a draft form, taking a lot of time, but basically this project that I'm going to be talking about today, it's very much alive, right? It's still changing, it's still being adjusted, but it's finding its shape. This project of the New Errancy, Unveiling Contemporary Migrant Literature, it came to life and began to take form when I realized how familiar and how similar migration stories, migration novels sound, especially those texts from the late 20th century. You probably recognize the pattern, you probably recognize the type of migrant going south, north, fleeing his country, a country that is in ruins, probably escaping from poverty, probably escaping from the state, probably not having the chance of going back, right? There's exile, there's nostalgia, there's heartbreak, and this kind of literature does not correspond only to a specific country, a specific region. It comes from different regions, it comes from different authors, from different techniques as well, but it's pretty much always the same plot. So from there I began paying special attention to contemporary texts that portray migration as something different. They portray migration not as exile, but more as exploration. They portray migration not as loss, but as curiosity. So these are also stories of people who are leaving a place, but it's also like the story of a person who's coming back. And that discovery opened a new question for me, which is what happens when migration or all of these movements stop being only a social, political condition and becomes a literary form. Because one of the aspects that I'm paying attention to is like how this literature is not only mirroring the reality, like how these authors are just not describing what's going on, but also how literature is part of this migratory movements and how the literature is evolving as well, okay? So to describe this shift, I came up with the term of La Nueva Errancia, which is Spanish for the new errancy. And it's a term that describes migratory movements and migratory movements that unfold new dynamics, okay? They also problematize, they also challenge, they also criticize the way that migration and migrants have been perceived and have been understood, okay? These authors, the authors that I'm going to talk about today, are just like a representation of generation of authors that are portraying migration in a different way, not as a problem, but it's migration more as a practice of care, as a practice of relation, as a practice of solidarity. So I'm going to take you today on a brief journey to explore how writers from Cuba, Equatorial Guinea, and the Dominican Republic reimagine and reconceptualize ideas of home, ideas of transatlantic or migrant identity, kinship, and all of these ideas that go beyond the traditional migratory movements, okay? In most 20th century, especially Latin American and Afro-Hispanic Africa, migration has been depicted in a way journey. So it follows the description that I mentioned before. It's just like it's usually a male migrant going south to north, and it hardly ever comes back, right? It hardly ever returns. And this is what we call the static migration model. And while this pattern of migration is still in place, because a lot of migration movements remain linear and constrained, there have been also other ways of describing mobility. There have been other ways to describe migration as well. So the new errancy that I'm talking about does not describe dynamics that appear all of a sudden in the 21st century. Like, it's not like, oh, it's 1999, we're going to the 21st century, so here we got like new dynamics. No, it describes like other kind of dynamics that were already present, but they were overlooked, they were not recognized because dominant social, political, and economic narratives, they prioritized other kind of literature, okay? They prioritized colonial literature with historical approaches, revolutions, exile, laws, and national identity, leaving little space for alternative forms of mobility. So what is new now is that these contemporary authors and this contemporary literature brings those neglected forms of those neglected texts to the center, and it gives them some voice, it gives them language, and it gives them visibilization, right? Or the visibility they didn't have before. The concept of the new errancy, it draws on, of course, from Edouard Glissant's and his ideas of nomadism, his ideas of relation, his ideas of mobility. It also draws on Stuart Hall's ideas of identity, how identity is always changing and it's not static, and it comes especially from Afro-Caribbean theorists like Remy Sipi and Luisa Campuzano, who reminds us that migration is also gendered, diverse, and plural. In the Hispanic world, migration has always been part of history and literature, and it has consistently appeared as a theme, as context, or sometimes as just mere background rather than the driving force of the narrative. But in that period, in that transition to the 21st century, something shifted because migration stopped being the backdrop to become the core of the storytelling. It stopped being the context to become a genre. And there's the literature of migration where mobility is the plot. It's just the center of the story. These narratives that I'm talking about today, they differ from other types of narratives of movement or other global traditions of movement, especially those European travel literature or colonial writing, where movement has a different approach, where movement is centered on travel, exploration, adventure, discovery, etc. the kind of movement that I'm paying attention to or that I'm analyzing is that the kind of movement with from a different register is the kind of movement that tells stories of solidarity, stories of curiosity, relation, inheritance, and repetition. And that is the world of the new errancy, where migration is wandering with purpose, is movement as relation, and it's about people who move but remain connected. People who live, but they're also coming back, or they at least have the chance of coming back. So migration here is not a break from home, but it's reimagining what home means. It's pretty much like what home means for different migrants, because they end up with different homes in different places. You might be wondering why these tiny countries, you might be wondering why I'm paying attention to Cuba, Equatorial Guinea, and the Dominican Republic. They are indeed small places, like super, super small. Just like I recently found out that, for example, Equatorial Guinea, it's even smaller than the state of Vermont. So it's really, really small. But these small places, they are producing vast ideas. They are geographically small but politically immense. We can recognize the history of Cuba from its independence, transition into a revolutionary period, and then everything that happens from 1950s to nowadays, going through a post-revolutionary period. The history of Equatorial Guinea is not very different. It's a country that went under Spanish colonial administration until 1968, and from then it has been under two dictatorships that are still in place nowadays, and the Dominican Republic. So these stories or these countries, they may seem distant, but they share a language, they share a colonial history, they share dictatorship period as well, and they share a deep interest in redefining what it means to move. Each of these countries illuminates an important part for what the new errancy is, and I'm going to be talking about this later, but just to give you like a general idea, Cuba is giving me like it offers the image of the female traveler that it's a contrast to the male exile. Equatorial Guinea provides the collective polyphonic voice of a continent, so it's not just addressing a local or a regional problem, but it's talking about like a more general problem in the continent. In the case of Dominican Republic, it presents the bilingual transnational family that redefines what home means. So altogether, they problematize, they challenge what the traditional and the traditional migration literature is, and that idea of the traditional migrant going south-north, escaping forever from this country, escaping from political turmoil, and they remind us that belonging is not a location, but it's a relation. So I'm going to talk about now like the three novels that I'm paying attention to in my dissertation, and it's the three wars of the new errancy. The first case that I have is the Cuban case, and I'm studying Karla Suárez's La Viajera. And why Cuba? Because Cuban migration has become, in one way, its own genre. Especially in the United States, it's very common that when we talk about migration, from all of the ideas that come to our mind, one of those ideas is like the city of Miami, a city imagined as a Caribbean migrants, it's a land for Caribbean migrants, especially Cubans. So people picture Little Havana, salsa music, strong coffee, the vibrant street life. But alongside that vibrancy, it comes another ideas as well. It comes like the idea of the political exile. It comes the idea of the migrant fleeing a country that is in ruins. It comes the idea of Fidel Castro, or a migrant that is leaving behind family and friends, and it's not possible for this person to come back. Karla Suárez published La Viajera, which is the travel, in 2005, and she's telling a total different story. The way she is addressing the migration in the island, it differs totally from the traditional way of thinking Cuban migration. Karla Suárez presents two main characters, which are Lucia and Circe. They are not exiles, they're just travelers. They are viajeras, right? They leave Havana not because of catastrophe, but because they want to see the world. They want to explore the world. They want to go through Rome, Madrid, Paris, they go to Sao Paulo, they go to Greece. They're just like travelers. They travel to one place, they come back, they keep moving, they get married, they have children, they come back, then they keep traveling and they keep coming back to Cuba. So they're just living life like that. So Suarez is pretty much replacing the drama of exile, is pretty much replacing the drama of escaping with the rhythm of travel. Her characters are not running from ideology or chasing the American dream. They are chasing experience itself. And in the Cuban context, that is revolutionary. For decades, Cuban literature was tied to ideology and loss. And La Viajera quietly dismantles that tradition, asking, what if migration is not always political? And what if migration is just simply human? Circe and Lucia, they're part of a generation that belong to a post-revolutionary moment, post-trauma, and it's deeply feminine, and it's a new wave of migration. They move in circles. They keep the returning as an essential part of their migration. They travel because of curiosity and not because of necessity, and they even keep returning home every single time they want, which is a rare privilege in Cuban literature. And this is where I first saw the new Errancy emerge as a feminist cartography of movement. So as I mentioned before, I'm not only paying attention how these authors are represented in reality, but I'm also paying attention to the different narrative techniques they're using to represent this reality. And in Karla Suárez's book, she offers some techniques that are important to what the new Errancy means. She offers a circular narrative structure, which differs from the linear narrative in the past. She also offers an epistolary and diary form that provides some emotional and some intimacy of the travel. She also offers a dual focalization, so it offers an expansive view of the migration. Not saying that Circe and Lucia are having the same experience, because their experience, it's way different. They are both travelers. They are not exiles, but their experience is way different. They go different ways. They return under different terms, but they keep being travelers. So Karla Suárez provides the idea that there's not a single idea of migration. Every single person has its own idea of migration. Very important, there's an intertextuality rewriting of the Odyssey. So in this text, in this novel, Karla Suárez integrates, so she keeps like a parallel with the Homeric novel of the Odyssey. She names her characters after some characters in this novel. So we have Circe and we have Ulysses as well. But Karla Suárez changes like the story, where Ulysses is not the central character anymore. It's not even in this novel. The main character of this novel is going to be Circe, which is the one that is not in an island anymore. It's the one that is moving around. So it's intertextual analysis that she provides in the novel. There's a temporal fragmentation that provides flashbacks, and also through the diary and through the letters, she provides some flashbacks to analyze and compare different thoughts at different moments of the writing or different moments of the experience. There are also some urban topographies. So yes, we have Madrid, we have Paris, we have Rome, but these cities are portrayed or are described not as destinations for migrants, but it's more like a series of exploration. Actually, when these travelers get to these cities, they have like some kind of they perform some kind of, what is it, like they have like some kind of, I forget it, how it is described. They have like some kind of performance to understand if the city talks to them. It's not about like getting to this European city, it's more trying to find out if this is their city or not. And that's what keeps them in moving. That's what keeps them
move them around. If the city does not feel like something that is talking back to them, they're just move around trying to find something else. So this is important in Karla Suárez's novel, and of course the feminist perspective, where women becomes the agents of movement. In the second case, I have Juan Tomás Ávila Laurel's The Gurubu Pledge. Okay, to be honest, this is like my favorite part of my dissertation. I've enjoyed so much working on this kind of literature from Equatorial Guinea, because Equatorial Guinea's literature is very special because it pretty much emerged in the 1980s because of many political issues and some colonial attachments to Spain, and there were some restrictions, etc. So when they were finally able to publish their texts, there was so much going on because there were many texts that were not published in the 70s, and when the decade of the 80s came, all of those texts also were published. So in the Gurubu Pledge, we don't follow a single traveler, which is going to be relevant to this study because we don't follow a single person, a single migrant, but we're following hundreds of migrants waiting at Mount Gurubu in northern Morocco to cross into Melillas, Spain's enclave in Africa. This story is about waiting and surviving the wait. And Ávila Laurel turns that waiting space into a community. There's no hero in this story because there's not a single migrant. The story is told from many voices from different parts of Africa, voices from Senegal, Nigeria, Cameroon, Mali, Gambia. And all of these personalities, all of these voices are sharing food, they share jokes and despair, and they become a temporary family. And this is the new Errancy, a migration that unfolds in between, where solidarity and humor become survival strategies. So an essential part of this text is like Juan Tomás Ávila Laurel is following a tradition that is started with another important writer in Equatorial Guinea, Donato Ndongo, who is widely recognized for starting the migration literature in Equatorial Guinea. But not only for that, but it's because like these authors moved their approach to the local literature, trying to show some solidarity with the continent, especially with Sub-Saharan Africa, trying to demonstrate that their needs are not only local, but are more like are shared with other countries in the continent. Like 2 years ago, thanks to the Romance Languages Department, I got the opportunity to visit Mount Gurubu, and I was struck by how this mountain, which is massive, it became no one's land. You know, it became just like a land where a lot of people live. All right, and there's an essential part in Juan Tomás' novel, and it's about language. And it's important because in the story, it doesn't really matter where you come from, it doesn't really matter what language you speak, or it doesn't matter the stereotypes all of them in Africa have of other Africans as well. What matters is that they're just waiting for the perfect moment to move to Melilla. Okay? So this novel takes place in a third space. It doesn't matter again like the point of departure, and it doesn't matter like the point of arrival. This is just like to provide context. Like it's more important is the third space and what's happening there. All the dynamics of relation, all the dynamics of communication that is happening there. So it's just again, Mount Gurubu is this mountain that become no one's land, a border thick with human stories suspended between hope and exhaustion. And it's a tension between the real and the absurd, what defines Ávila Laurel tones, because he uses a lot of irony, he uses a lot of comedy to speak about tragedy. Even inside the migrant community, you can tell like there are certain behaviors against other nationalities as well, in Africa as well. But this is like quickly negotiated between the migrants when they realize that all of them are under the same conditions of migration. The novel teaches something essential, that even in spaces of crisis, people laugh, love, and tell stories, and they live while the world debates their existence, if they are important or not. Some of the techniques that I find very relevant from the novel for the new Errancy is the polyphonic narration. So as I mentioned before, there's not a single hero, there's not a single voice in this kind of literature. The book is actually divided in many voices, at least 5 or 6 voices, but these voices are bringing more voices into the conversation. So the perspectives, they change according to political, and economic, and social contexts from the places where these migrants are coming from. We got also the testimonial realism, because the text blurs testimony and fiction. So something that is happening in real life, but also is describing some relations that are fictional. We have the spatial liminality, where Mount Gurugu represents suspension and perpetual transition. We have irony and humor. We have the oral narrative style, which is also central to this study, because of the polyphonic voice. Most of the stories that these migrants are telling, they mimic the storytelling from African tradition. So that is very important for storytelling and collective memory. We have the absence of a protagonist, so the I becomes a we. We don't have a protagonist here. And we have the realism and allegory, because everyday life becomes symbolic of existence itself. The third novel that I'm working on, and this is pretty much like the part of my third chapter, is the novel from the Dominican Republic. It's the novel from Loida Maritza Pérez that is called Geographies of Home. And we moved to the Dominican Republic, but more precisely moving to the diaspora in New York, where Geographies of Home tells the story of a Dominican family navigating migration, faith, and most importantly, generational memory. There are not triumphant arrivals or happy endings. The novel moves between English, Spanish, and Spanglish, sometimes gracefully, sometimes painfully, but Perez turns bilingualism into a geography of identity. Okay? Her characters are not negotiating only 2 countries, her characters are also negotiating 2 languages, 2 generations, 2 selves. Her novel presents migration as inheritance, full of love, guilt, nostalgia, and resilience. The daughters carry their parents' journeys inside them. It's not about living anymore, it's about living in translation. So in this novel, Loida Maritza Pérez is portraying a Dominican family that moved to New York, but the story goes beyond the movement of migration. The story goes and pays attention to what's happening after the arrival and what happens with the upcoming generations. It's a constant renegotiation of language, it's a constant renegotiation of mindsets, and the constant debate of coming or not coming back to the island, to home. Geographies of Home is super relevant to this study, because it defines and it reconceptualizes what home means for each of us. In this case, it tells the story of one of the daughters, Ileana, who moved out from her parents' house, and she's now living in upstate New York, and after some time she decides to come back to home in central New York. And is this idea of coming back home what challenges and problematizes what home means, because she actually thinks that by coming back to, I forget where they live, but in central New York, she believes that coming back home, it's coming back to a safe place where family is, and she quickly realizes that it's not like that. And it's the same thought for her mom, Aurelia, who doesn't consider New York as home, but she considers the Dominican Republic as home, and she wants to go back to that safe place. So it's a constant debate of what home means for every single person, and for those people that have multiple homes, and how they renegotiate and navigate these ideas of what home is. Some essential parts of this novel go with multilingualism and code switching, which is very essential. It goes from English to Spanish, from Spanish to Spanglish. There's a lot of code switching there to express the cultural hybridity. There's a fragmented and a polyphonic structure. It's kind of similar to Juan Tomás' novel, because the story is told from different perspectives. The story is told from many voices as well. All of them are feminine voices. There's an intergenerational and gender perspective. Migration is filtered through family and gender experience in this. There's memory and trauma, and there's the hybrid spatiality, where home becomes symbolic, unstable, and emotional. Okay? So not every single novel over here, not every single novel that I have described captures all the dynamics of the new Errancy. Okay, I tried to find a novel to capture all of them, but it was just impossible, right? So every single novel illuminates an aspect of the new Errancy, because each writer highlights different dimensions of movement depending on their own reality. Some of them echo traditional patterns as well, while others challenge or transform them. Together, they map the emotional and political spectrum of what migration means in the Hispanic world today, especially Latin American and Hispanophone Africa. In the new Errancy, migration is not merely a journey from one place to another, it is everything that unfolds in between. It is those letters, those silences, it's the accents, the laughter, the love. In this story's migration is not exile, but it's experiment. Each writer reclaims as movement as something more than necessity. It goes beyond necessity. So for example, for Karla Suárez, movement is not about necessity, but it's more about exploration. For Juan Tomás, it's more about like solidarity with other migrants in the continent. And for Loida Maritza Pérez, movement is more like inheritance. As Eduard Clisson reminds us, errancy is not rootlessness, but relation. To wander is to connect, to move with purpose, to remain open to what cannot be predicted. That is what these writers embody. The new errancy invites us to see migration not as a loss, but as expansion, not as departure, but as connection. Okay? So this is the project that I've been working on for a couple of years. Like I mentioned before, is the third chapter, the one on Loida Maritza Pérez, the one that I'm spending more time on right now. It's been challenging because in order to talk about the new errancy, I have to consider like some other work that was especially written in the 20th century, in the late 20th century, that also portrays movements that happen after the dictatorship, and all of those movements usually have a connection with the United States. But I think like the most important part, like the most valuable part for this novel, for Loida Maritza Pérez's novel, is like the intergenerational dynamic, is the intergenerational perspective of what's going on, what's happened after the migration movement is complete, which is a totally different case from Karla Suárez and Juan Tomás Ávila. I'm trying, in this chapter, I'm trying to pay attention to how language is used, also how the concept of home is being redefined, how it's being reconceptualized, and also trying to pay attention to how the new errancy unfolds new dynamics in this Dominican or Dominican American migratory literature in the 21st century. This is pretty much the project. Now that I would love to hear your thoughts or your stories, your questions, what do you think about this, or it could be about the first, the second, or the third chapter, or even your migration stories if you want to talk about migration, okay? But thank you so much for listening to me today, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you for that wonderful wonderful presentation. Would you like to moderate your own Q&A, or do you want me to help you?
Yeah, I ran out of energy.
Okay. So we'll go by raising hands. I'm sure there are many comments and questions.
Alejo.
Go ahead.
Really fascinating project. Congratulations. And I was wondering, in your research, if you come across to the concept of transterrado, which is the concept that Daisy Zamora coined, meaning those people who move to different places and they decide to stay in those places, but they're not really exiled, but they're translanded. And then maybe there's a connection with, what is the writer you're working with? Karla Suárez, being Daisy Zamora from Nicaragua. So I know you explore that concept.
Transterrados.
Transterrados.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Jesus. I'm not working on the concept itself. However, I did mention it in my dissertation because there's a part of my dissertation that actually considers and problematizes the category of movements. What we consider migrants, what we consider exiles, what it's a traveler, and there's a section of it where it actually problematizes what's the difference between this category of traveler and this category of traveler. What's the difference between a migrant and exile? Can be a migrant, exile can be a transterrado, an exile. In the analysis of the novels, I do not touch on this concept yet, but I did touch on it in the introduction. We're trying to understand how these categories are not rigid. Like a person can be represented by many of these categories at the same time. I don't know if I can use this concept, because in transterrados, like the migrant itself, they decide to stay in a place like that. If I understand the concept right, they initially don't have the willingness to stay, but eventually they decide to stay in this new land. It's not the case for the third novel, for Loida Maritza, but it could be, now that I think about it, could be the case for the second novel, for Juan Tomás Ávila, because the novel describes that these migrants have been there for years. And in reality, that's what actually happens. A lot of these migrants stay in Mount Gurugu for months or for years, trying to wait for the perfect moment to try to jump the Melillas fence. And I remember that the novel describes that the mound becomes their home because they actually organize the mountain as a home. So this can be like a concept that I can use for this novel. I didn't think about it. Thank you for bringing that up. But like as of today, I haven't used it in any of my analysis before. I just didn't consider it. But now I'll think about it, especially for the second novel, because I think they would be like a good way of analyze like the experience of these migrants whose migratory movement takes years to be accomplished in some cases. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alejo, for showing us what you're working on and for bringing these topics and your perspective. I was thinking that, I see that you're working more into a space and how movement intersects with these novels, but I was wondering if you could bring a little bit about the temporality, like can you talk a little more about when these novels were published and if that conditions a little bit their perspective and how that plays into the concept of new Errancy, like what temporality are you talking about? And yeah, if that, I have another question, but I think that would.
In terms of temporality, these novels were published in the transition to the 21st century or in the 21st century. La Viajera was published in 2005, The Good Evil Place was published in 2015, and Geographies of Home was published in 1999. I think it's a period of time that illuminates what the new Errancy means, not because, what I mentioned before, not because like these dynamics emerge or suddenly appear at this point, but it's when migration becomes a genre. I'm just going to put it like that. Where migration becomes the core of the storytelling, where migration is the central idea of this literature. Many of these, not only Karla, Juan Tomás, and Loida, they're not the only ones who are working on migration novels right now. Like we have a tradition that started with them or with some other writers before them. But like the thing over here is that they belong to they have different stories. You know, Karla, Juan Tomás, and Loida, they have different stories. Karla, for example, in a recent interview that I had with Karla, we're talking about like where all of these ideas of La Viajera came from, and she was saying that at the beginning it was a way to talk about her own experience. Okay, but at the end she realized that she was not talking about herself, that she was talking about a generation of Cubans who were trying to do the same. And I think this part of the transition to the 21st century is essential to portray what she's talking about, because it provides like at least a different way of seeing mobility in the Cuban context. Not a mobility that is accessible to everybody, but it's accessible for some people, and it's a different way to see it. In the case of Juan Tomás, it's important because some critics Juan Tomás considered himself as an exile, right? But critics do not consider Juan Tomás as an exile. So you're saying like you're not an exile because you don't follow these conditions. And so like no, I'm an exile, and I want to be an exile because this is happening to me, and I'm going through this. And it's a constant debate, again, going back to the idea of who is an exile, who is migrant, because that has an impact in the novel, right? In his case, it's a little bit different because he's not trying to portray his own experience. Juan Tomás did not go through all of the dynamics that he is describing in his novel, but it's more like the kind of solidarity that he's trying to show with other migration movements in Africa, and that are taking more relevance in the transition of the 21st century.
I think I saw this and then this.
Congratulations, I enjoyed so much the presentation. The topic is fascinating, really. I'm thinking about the question about what home means. I think specifically in La Fiesta del Chivo, when Urania Cabral returned to Dominican Republic, and she found that home doesn't mean anything to her, or just at least trauma or bad memories. The question is for you, what home means?
Yeah, the concept of home. I started thinking about the concept of home after reading novel, because I think I used to have like this traditional thought that home is where my family is, and then I started thinking like, where's my family, right? Now my family is not a single place anymore. My family is across South America. And yeah, like this novel, it shows, or it gave me this idea of reconsider where I belong, or where we belong, and like the kind of communities that we create in our life. For me, well, that question, I don't know, it's kind of interesting because sometimes I just say like I want to go home, and when I'm at home I want to say I want to go back home, and yes. I don't want to be in this home anymore. And it's fine, and I think it's probably kind of the feeling that Loida Maritza Pérez is showing, because it's the way that we recreate the different aspect or the different meaning of what home means. And I think that every single home is just like different, I guess. Like it doesn't have to mimic like all the homes do not have to be the same. But for me, home in some ways, like to sound like very generic, is like where we feel safe and where we feel comfortable. And I'm not saying that I don't feel comfortable or safe back at home in Colombia, right? But it's just like eventually I just feel like I'm not at home anymore, and it comes from this. I don't know. I think it's after reading this novel that all of these ideas started growing on me, like what home is, and we keep moving. We keep moving. Now that you say that, for example, I don't know. This is probably my last year in Oregon, and I'm gonna have to move somewhere else, and I'm gonna have to start creating a new home, and that's gonna be creating this map of geographies and relations. And thank you.
I love this project, so thanks for the presentation. I had a question about something that you said about Suárez's novel being kind of a new generation of kind of post-trauma approach to the problem. And I mean, in general, I see what you're identifying in terms of the new Errancy to be part of that, a kind of almost a post-trauma way of looking at migration, right? And I was curious, though, how formally that differs in Suárez's work from Pérez's work, because when you were speaking about that novel, and I haven't read any of them, but I hope I will in the future, you were talking about how in Geographies of the Home, it more used memory and trauma as structure. So I'm curious, like how does, but yet they both share a lot of formal characteristics from what you were identifying in terms of like a fragmentary sort of kind of form of narration. So I was just curious, how does that look differently in those two, and why would you identify Suárez as being post-trauma versus Pérez?
Yeah, they're totally different because one of the most important things that Suárez does is moving away from the political spectrum. In this novel, there's not a single mention of the revolutionary period. There's not a single mention of Fidel. There's not a single mention of the government or anything. These characters, Circe and Lucia, they go beyond this spectrum. So in some way, in what I try to say, like in my dissertation, is that Karla Suárez tried to eradicate or delete the idea of politics in this novel. Even though I know it's different because migration is everything about politics, right? But Suárez is doing something else when she's not mentioning anything like that. They're not migrants, they're travelers, and that's something that she's pointing out, that's something that she's highlighting. We Cubans are travelers as well, and we can travel the world, we can go around, and we can even return, which is like totally opposite from what Pérez is doing, because the generation of like the family that travels, or the family that migrates to New York, it's a family that is escaping from, or that actually survived the dictatorship of Trujillo. So all of their experiences is based on this trauma from this dictatorship, and the mere idea of coming back is influenced by the idea of coming back to a dictatorship, or coming back to the ashes of the dictatorship, and this is what is actually preventing them from coming back. That is just part of that is just one small part of the novel. The other part is just like the intergenerational part, but it's very important, this part of the parents, because they wish to come back home, but they cannot do it. While in Suárez's work, the idea of home is not stable. The idea of home is multiple as well. And the political sphere, the political environment does not interfere in their decisions or in their movements.
We're going to call on me. Just building from Anita's question, I was listening to you, and the last part of your answer, I think, got to the question I was going to ask you, but I was wondering, are the travelers in La Viajera, because it came out in 2005, right? So is that traveling that they're doing, is it sort of inflected with that late 1990s, early 2000s cosmopolitanism? Is it a kind of cosmopolitan tourism, or is it something a little different?
It follows two different stories,
Yeah.
Circe and Lucia, and their travel or their movement is very important because it starts from south to south. So the first place that they visit is not Madrid, Paris, or Rome. It's Sao Paulo. So they create this itinerary of movement from south to south because they just want to explore the world. That's the word that they keep using all the time. And by performing this movement from south to south, they center this idea of going in a vertical movement to the north. Now, it's part of tourism. Yes, it's a part of exploration, but it's also that they're open to the world. They're open to whatever, to the unpredictable, to whatever the world brings to them. That's how they get married. That's how they have children. That's how they get families, because they are open to what is happening to them. Nothing is planned. They leave the country with the wish, the illusion of coming back at some point, which they eventually do, but they keep moving. So I think that is central to Suárez's novel, that they keep moving. Now that I remember, there was a comment I got a couple of years ago from a professor. I was given a presentation on this book in LASA, and I was presenting the new Errancy, and I was having this conversation with a professor, and she said, like, why the new Errancy is new when it's 2005, right? And I was like, true. No, but it was like a moment for me, like, yeah, why is this the new Errancy? And I was just thinking about it, because of course it's a contemporary approach, but the situation with these migratory movements is that they keep changing all the time, and they keep changing with political, economic decisions. They keep changing all the time. So the approach that I have to this novel, it's probably not. It's not going to be the same. That we're going to have two different novels that is going to be published in the upcoming years, or the novel that was published in 2020, because like a lot of things have happened in Cuba since then, and that's exactly what she said, and that's something I'm reconsidering in my dissertation, how I'm referring to a post-revolutionary moment in 2005, but there has been a lot happening since then. So the new Errancy does approach a moment, a contemporary moment, but it also refers to a specific moment of redefining or reconceptualizing, challenging the traditional way of seeing migration and migrants, which doesn't mean that it's the way of seeing like current migrants and current migration, because it keeps changing.
You know, sometimes the opposite of new is not old, but it's classic. And so one of the things I love about your presentation and how suddenly you made me think of Ulysses as a migrant, a classic migrant, right? And so I think it's really interesting and important that you're always trying to look back to understand what is so specific about what I'm discussing that is not a feature of classical or classic sort of tales of errancy or migrants. And I think Ulysses is a really interesting case because he does return home. Thank God the dog is there to recognize him, right? And so I think it's, you know, I would want to hear more and encourage you to really kind of dig into that, because every time you're able to really distinguish the very different conditions under which those authors are writing and the stories that they're telling, everything that you can do to really help distinguish from the classical migrant, but also sort of the classic migrant who is maybe a little more recent, which is what that professor was probably referring to, right? The sort of the earlier migrants. So it's not so much a question as a really an invitation to sort of really keep digging there into the specificity. Because when, for instance, you speak of, you had a wonderful phrase, wandering with a purpose, which is a beautiful phrase, and you use that to characterize the specificity of those authors. But you could argue that early modern travel writers were wandering with a purpose as well. And so maybe you have to be a little more specific, a purpose to do what? Of course there was conquest in that particular early modern period, but then, so the purpose, what is the purpose, because wandering with a purpose can apply to earlier classic sort of migrant steps.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you so much, Vivian. Again, going to Karla Suárez's work and this parallel she has with the Odyssey, it was important to me because she was actually criticizing and problematizing the idea of this traditional movement by pointing out to Ulysses how he gets the right to go, explore, discover, and come back home eventually, right? And I think that her work is very important because she decenters this whole idea and she brings out Circe from this island where she's a prisoner. And she is the one exploring, she is the one just traveling the world. About the purpose, wandering with purpose, I will have to think about it because I don't know if she has a specific purpose. Maybe her purpose is just like the idea of traveling. It's just maybe their purpose goes beyond a specific goal. It goes beyond a specific objective. But it makes an interesting parallel with the Odyssey because I don't know. I probably just thought that like at the beginning you said like the opposite of new is not old. It's probably more the thinking that I was having, the thought that I was having, like if this is not new, this is old. And probably if I have a different approach to that concept, I can give the term like a new direction or trying to be more specific. So thank you for that.
We're going to take one more question and then we'll end it there. Yeah.
Okay, got a question about, by the way, this is great, the topic, everyone's gonna love talking about this and hearing about it, so excellent. The question's about audiences and language and its representation, and it has two parts. The one is, so I see like, that's this edition up here, Suárez's edition is Spanish, Ávila's is English, or maybe that's a translation, I don't know. Pérez's, that's an English book. But you said that it goes between Spanish and English and Spanglish. So who are they writing for and where are they publishing and why? And what languages are they choosing and why?
That's the question I was avoiding. Okay. Thank you. Yes, like Karla Suárez's book is published. It was published in 2005. It's originally published in Spanish, but it has been translated to so many languages. She's broadly translated. I think that she's speaking not only to the generation of Cubans who are able to migrate after the post-revolutionary or in the post-revolutionary period, but she's also talking to a new generation that goes beyond the political sphere.
Where is the Spanish edition?
Where?
Where did she publish it? What country is it published in?
I think it's Alfaguara.
I don't remember.
I think it's Alfaguara. I think it's in Spain.
So Spain.
Alfaguara?
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, thank you. The most problematic case for me here is Juan Tomás Ávila Laurel because this work was originally written in Spanish. However, it wasn't published in Spanish because the publishing houses didn't want to publish his work, and he had to find a translator to translate his work, and that was the only way that the Goodwill Pledge was published. So the original work is still unpublished, which obviously unfolds different dynamics.
But you have it.
Oh yes, I do. Yes.
Because Juan Tomás gave it to Alejo to use in his dissertation.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, so it speaks a lot about who the audience is because it is not only about talking about Hispanophone Africa. It's more about talking about not even, it cannot be even read in Equatorial Guinea. It has to be read abroad.
Okay, so it's something problematic. I touch on this a little bit in the dissertation, trying to see how the publishing houses have some impact on this. It also happened with the Cuban literature in the 80s, the 90s as well. I don't remember where it was published, but it was.
Is that And Other Voices? That's in the UK.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for Loida Maritza Pérez, yeah, it was originally written that way, in trying to point out the bilingualism and the code switching that it's a main characteristic of this diaspora, especially for the Dominican diaspora, and it is its audience has pointed out to this like diasporic families, diasporic generations in the U.S., but also those families who end up returning to the Dominican Republic, finding home. So yeah, I think that those are like the goals in terms of audience and in terms of languages for these authors. I was telling at the beginning that they share a lot in terms of language, in terms of history, but they are also different in terms of how they are written. And I did not talk about it in my dissertation. Maybe it's something that I need to
in the book.
yes, point out. Because I mean, I was aware of the difference. I just didn't want to go that way. Just
Yet.
yes.
But just to reiterate, Alejo was writing his dissertation in Spanish. Juan Tomás, when he met with him, gave him the manuscript in Spanish. So Alejo's work, once it's available to the public, will publicize Juan Tomás's novel in Spanish with the quotes in Spanish that will then be part of the circulation of this work in the Spanish-speaking world. It has not yet happened.
Not yet.
So Alejo's will be the first to do this.
But is he looking to publish his novel in Spanish also?
He's still trying to, yeah.
find
Mhm.
that.
Wow.
Interesting.
All right, so I'll tell you what, we are gonna have one heck of a books and print party.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, this was brilliant.